of the Qantas announcement this morning. Let's go now to our panel, Liberal MP Seselja and Shadow Parliamentary Secretary Jim Chalmers. Thanks for your time this morning.
G'day.
First to you, Jim Chalmers, just explain Labor's position when it comes to ownership now, because there's been a lot of attention on the 49% total foreign ownership position, but you may be willing to move on some of the other restrictions on Qantas.
Yeah, I think firstly, more broadly, I think for the more than 30,000 workers at Qantas who woke up this morning, there would have been a bit of a feeling of dread about this announcement that we'll get shortly. The numbers of jobs that have been discussed in the media so far would be a hammer blow to a lot of families and to the economy. We've already lost 63,000 jobs since the election of the Abbott government, and another 5,000 or 6,000 would be devastating, particularly for the families affected. Our priority, as other shadow ministers have said this morning, our priority is to keep Qantas in Australian hands. That's our number one principle that we bring to the table as we work with the government to try and get a good solution here. That, of course, means the 49% foreign investment threshold, the limit that people have been talking about, which you refer to now. Beyond that, that's our most important principle, and beyond that, we want to work constructively. We want the government to get this right. We think the time has come for something concrete and not just sort of leaks and things to the newspapers from day to day, but something real, and we want to play a constructive role in that. So
you wouldn't be concerned, for example, for a company like China Southern to own 49% of Qantas?
We start from the basis that we want it to be majority Australian owned. That's our principle, as I said. That's an important principle because Australians want a national carrier and we want a national carrier as well. Beyond that, you can name all kinds of companies that might be interested, all kinds of individuals. Beyond that, we want to be pretty constructive, we want to be pretty open-minded. So long as that 49% isn't breached, we'll have a conversation about anything else that the government might want to announce.
Seselja, would changes to the 35% and 25% restrictions help Qantas?
Oh, look, I think that's part of the mix. But I think there's a range of things going on here. I mean, I agree with Jim that I think it's a very difficult time for those workers, and certainly we hope that the kind of figures that have been bandied about don't eventuate today. But, you know, hope is not a strategy, and there does need to be a strategy, and it involves a range of things. You know, there's cost structures that are imposed on Qantas, some of which aren't imposed on others, such as the carbon tax, $100 million a year. The Qantas Sale Act, of course, doesn't apply to Qantas's competitors. So there's a range of things. There's the 35% that you talk about, but there's also the foreign ownership. And people should also remember that if the Qantas Sale Act was changed, we know that there's a number of different things, and it's still likely, in fact, very probable that Qantas as an international brand would remain Australian owned as it would need to. So we may only be talking about the domestic arm. We've seen Virgin do a similar thing. Its international arm is Australian owned, or majority Australian owned, I think, but Virgin more broadly is not. So these are the sort of things we've got to look at. But I think at the moment Qantas is operating a little bit with one hand tied behind its back. It does need to get its own house in order. But you know, I think it is reasonable that we look at all of these restrictions and we look at the kind of environment that Qantas operates in, so that we can make it as profitable as possible, and we can see a good national carrier as well.
What about a debt guarantee similar to that offered to the banks during the GFC? Remembering that the status of Qantas at the moment is junk, is that a company really that the government would want to guarantee?
Well, let's remember, and a lot's been said about this, and I think we need to clarify that virtually every airline in the world doesn't have a credit rating, so effectively has junk status. So Qantas is actually one of the only airlines in the world that's been profitable, and it's facing difficulties now. So people shouldn't talk Qantas down. Qantas does very, very well in comparison to others, but others get backing from governments and the like. So I think a debt guarantee should be a last resort. I don't think we should certainly rule that out, but the reason you would be considering it is because Qantas has artificial restrictions on it now. If Qantas didn't have those kind of artificial restrictions, I think the case for a debt guarantee would be a lot weaker.
Jim Chalmers, a debt guarantee, is that something that Labor would happily support?
Well, we'll listen to whatever the government announcement is. I mean, the sequence now needs to be that Qantas management needs to stand up and explain what's happening and what their strategy is, particularly in relation to jobs. And then the onus is on the government to stand up and explain their strategy, particularly in relation to jobs. We'll keep saying over and over again that we will listen to that with an open mind, except on the on the main principle of foreign ownership. Whether it's a debt guarantee or other instruments, we're prepared to work constructively with the government.
On jobs, Seselja, Tony Abbott yesterday said there wouldn't be any government restrictions placed on Qantas to keep jobs in Australia. Why is that?
Well, I think you've got to look at the reality, and the reality of the kind of restrictions we've got at the moment is that we could see, hopefully not, but we could see thousands of people losing their jobs, and that could be announced today. So you've got to look at what is the impact of these kind of restrictions. It's like when you have a high tariff wall. It might support some industries, but in fact it leads to less jobs overall and less economic growth. So we need to have the settings in place that allow our companies to thrive, that allow Qantas to thrive, and I think that's really where Tony Abbott's going. Let's get the best possible settings so that we see economic growth as much as possible.
Jim Chalmers, should government really be telling a business like Qantas how to run itself in terms of jobs being kept in Australia?
The government's job is to concern itself with employment in the Australian economy, and if part of that is working with a company like Qantas, then so be it. Equally true of manufacturing companies, other companies in the economy. I agree with Zed.
Working with or restricting, though? Working with Qantas?
Well, government has a role to play in maximising employment in the economy. Obviously, the private sector is the engine of employment in the economy, and that's as it should be. But any government who cares about jobs should be working with companies. They should be getting in place the best regulatory settings, all of the settings to maximise employment. We do think that the government should be talking with Qantas seriously about some of these things, but not just Qantas, right across the economy. We do have a problem with unemployment right now. The unemployment rate is higher now under a global recovery than it was under Labor during a global financial crisis. We've had 63,000 jobs lost since the election. So there is a role for government in trying to maximise employment.
So the crucial question, Seselja, when can we expect some sort of government announcement on assistance for Qantas?
Well, I think the announcements I think will be coming soon. I think the government has put a lot of thought into this. I think obviously when we see what happens today, that will be another precursor, and I think the government will be moving fairly quickly on this.
Is that acceptable to you, Jim Chalmers?
Well, I mean, this was first floated in a private lunch by Joe Hockey last year, and they've known about this issue for a long time. Qantas has been in the government's ear for a long time about these issues. It really is the time for a plan, and then we can consider that plan.
OK, we'll take a quick break. We'll be back with the rest of the day's politics in just a moment.
At IGA and Super IGA's gigantic sale, you can afford to shop big. Save a huge half price on Allen's confectionery bag varieties, and you could win a gigantic shopping spree.
That's the way I like it.
For a strictly limited time, Kia are offering Platinum Fleet deals on the Sorrento. So now private buyers like you can save big on this award-winning SUV. But hurry, this offer must end February 28.
TPG presents our Unlimited Bundle. Get unlimited ADSL2 Plus with home phone line rental. Unlimited calls to local and standard national numbers. Unlimited calls to Australian mobile numbers. And unlimited calls to selected international countries. Plus a Wi-Fi modem. All for just $79.99 a month. Yep, $79.99 a month. TPG is a multi-award winner.
tpg.com.au.
What's one word 2.5 million Australians think of for insurance?
Allianz Insurance, that's right. How can I help?
Allianz, because life's full of moments.
I just wanna be okay today.
You'll be okay with Allianz.
Thank you. That'll be $10, please. OK, here's all of my card details. $250, please. OK, here's all of my card details.
That'll be $150, please.
OK, here's all of my card details. Oh no!
Stop giving out your card numbers all over the net. No one sees your financial details when you check out with PayPal.
At Coles, prices are down and staying down on even more of the brands you buy most. Like Huggies Bulk Pack Nappies, new to down and staying down to just $17.
New to down. More brands are down.
And Golden Circle Fruit Juice, new to down and staying down to just $2.70.
New to down.
New to down.
Look at the savings.
More brands are down.
Fungal nail infections can be embarrassing, and whilst other treatments can take 6 to 12 months, Caniston can fast forward your treatment to 2 months or less. Introducing Caniston Fungal Nail Treatment Set. In Phase 1, Caniston removes the infected part of the nail, exposing the fungi on the nail bed. In Phase 2, Caniston treats the fungal nail infection at the source, leaving you with renewed confidence. Fast forward with Caniston.
You're watching AM Agenda. Thanks for your company. Still with me here, Jim Chalmers and Zed Seselja. I want to turn to Manus Island and reports overnight, an interim report, in fact, from PNG Police that is suggesting the 23-year-old asylum seeker killed over a week ago was killed by local security staff running from the company running security, G4S. First to you, Zed Seselja. It's only an interim report. It's PNG Police and it's early days, but that is pretty concerning if the security staff employed by the company, employed by the government, is responsible.
Well, obviously, the whole thing is very concerning because we don't want to see these kind of things happening. So, but we should be very careful not to be reading too much into what is an interim report. There is a detailed investigation going on into this incident. I think that's been done independently and no doubt very, very thoroughly. And so we do need to get to the bottom of what happens so that it never happens again, so that we do see better management at Manus. This is has been a bit of an ongoing issue in terms of the arrangements there. This is partly something we inherited in terms of those arrangements, and if there's improvements that can be made that come out of the investigation that avoid violence, that avoid this kind of disruption, then all efforts need to be made to make sure that happens.
The Immigration Minister, Scott Morrison, was on Sky last night. He says changes are happening. Take a look.
Made major changes. We're making more changes, and that's the product of the assessments and reviews, particularly on a security front, we've been doing over months and months. We were left a mess. We've been cleaning up the mess on Manus Island. Tragically, that mess resulted in the situation we saw over the past week, and that is a terrible tragedy.
Jim Chalmers, Labor awarded the contract to G4S when it set up Manus Island last year. Was that a mistake?
Like everyone, I want to see what the investigation reveals about this incident. Our issue, of course, is with the Minister, Scott Morrison, who made a mess of the information around this originally. It's not acceptable for a minister to say something on a Tuesday, to know on a Tuesday that it's wrong, and take until Saturday night to clear the record.
Well, it's not true, so I'll put, well, it's not, because I'll pull
he said so in the Parliament, so I hope he didn't mislead the Parliament.
Well, no, because what he actually said, if you look at the chain of events, he was given incorrect information initially, and he said that... It
took him until Saturday night
but on the Tuesday he acknowledged there were conflicting reports.
He did start to correct
and so he said there were conflicting reports, so he already said that he couldn't rely necessarily on all the information, and it took some days, and we heard this from Martin Bowles.
Until Saturday morning, that's correct. And then at 9 o'clock on Saturday night, he put a press release out.
So what you said was actually wrong. At the first instance where he knew that what he had relied on may not be correct, he put that in the public domain.
The record wasn't corrected until Saturday night at 9 o'clock.
But he already, as soon as he did it on the Tuesday, he made it clear.
You know that at 9 o'clock on the Saturday, the
on Tuesday we knew there were conflicting reports. So I don't see what difference he could have done.
This has spun off into another area, of course, this week with the Labor Defence spokesman Stephen Conroy accusing the three-star general, Lieutenant General Angus Campbell, who's in charge of Operation Sovereign Borders, of being engaged in a political cover-up. He's retracted that, but why won't he apologise?
I think it was absolutely essential that he withdrew that comment, and he did, and I'm glad that he did. Our problem is with the government and the culture of secrecy. Our concern is that the military not be dragged into this culture of secrecy and this sort of political strategy that's being run by the government.
But are you comfortable defending the non-apology?
I think it's crucial that he withdrew it, and he did. I think that's the most important thing. And anybody who heard Bill Shorten's very strong speech in the Parliament yesterday would be left in no doubt about our support for the military, our respect and our regard for people who put themselves in harm's way, and particularly the superstars of the military like General Campbell.
Seselja, is the military being used as political cover?
No, and I'll deal with the two issues. One, Bill Shorten, it was a insincere defence because he won't force Stephen Conroy to apologise, and Stephen Conroy should apologise. This was a disgraceful attack. Ed Husick got it right. The Labor up-and-comer Ed Husick said it was wrong. Bill Shorten never used those words, and he should have. He should have said it was wrong. Not only should he withdraw it, but he should apologise. I think everyone knows that. On the issue of the military, Angus Campbell himself has said very clearly that it's on his advice that we have the information flow that we have, and you know what? It's working. That information flow, that lack of information that's going to the people smugglers, has seen now more than 2 months, for the first time in many years, 2 months where no one has come to this country illegally on a boat.
In July, of course, before the change of government.
Well, a range of things have happened, and not giving people smugglers information has helped. Lieutenant General Angus Campbell is 100% right when he says that is important. Scott Morrison is right. The policy is working. One person died every 2 days on Labor's watch trying to come to this country. That's what we were dealing with.
To that, Jim, and we'll move on.
Oh, let's not pretend it's some sort of high-end policy strategy, this information, the stopping of the information flow. You couldn't shut them up about boat arrivals before the election.
We're only going on information that the government released.
It's a political strategy.
Okay, Fiona Nash, the Assistant Health Minister, has also been making headlines this week through Senate committees. Now, her Chief of Staff resigned over what was seen to be a conflict of interest. Why isn't that enough, Jim Chalmers?
This story's got a long way to run. We learned last night that the lobbyist that was in charge of a company at the same time as being paid by the Abbott government was involved in some way with the decision to grant Cadbury money during last year. So the Prime Minister has some questions to answer on that front. But it can't be the case that both Senator Nash and the Prime Minister are telling the truth, because their stories are at odds. At the core of this is a serious misleading of Parliament, and I think that Senator Nash and the Prime Minister have done more to trash parliamentary standards this week than anyone else has done in a long time.
Seselja.
Look, I think Labor's now flogging a dead horse on this. The individual has resigned, and Senator Nash made it very clear around the circumstance of that. She spent we had 3.5 hours. I was in the committee where the Labor Party had free rein to ask every question they could, and really no new information emerged yesterday during those hearings.
Okay.
So I think this one's moved on.
There's one final issue I want to talk about. It is important. That's the paid parental leave scheme. Reports in the Financial Review today that the interim report from the Commission of Audit is suggesting that Tony Abbott's scheme is too generous. Seselja, is this going against the grain of your narrative?
Well, I don't know what is in the interim report. I haven't seen it. So, leaks to newspapers or alleged leaks, who knows what's actually in the report. So we'll wait for it. But what I would say about the paid parental leave scheme is Tony Abbott made this an important issue as a leader. He took this issue on and he took it to the people, and he got elected as Prime Minister. So he has a mandate, and the Coalition has a mandate for this policy. But the claims that we hear from Labor all the time, in terms of the generosity, they can't argue with the fact that, let's take one of those SPCR motor workers that we hear.
Look, I don't want to get too far off the paid parental leave scheme, and look, I'll just ask a follow-up question to you, Seselja, and that is, why not release this interim report in the Commission of Audit? Because you are exposed through these sorts of leaks, as you pointed them out, and we're told that only 3 people know: the Prime Minister, the Treasurer, and the Finance Minister as well. So who knows where this leak came from, but why not release it and stop being sort of accused of picking and choosing?
Well, I think there's a process here. I mean, it was very clear at the start that the government was going to go through the process with the Commission of Audit and then take time to consider those findings and feed it into the budget. I think that's a pretty reasonable process. That's what the government's doing, and we're not far away from the budget, so people will see very clearly much of the government's response to the Commission of Audit in the budget. I think that's a good process.
Jim Chalmers.
The Prime Minister shouldn't need a sneaky leak designed to embarrass him to tell him that it's wrong to line the pockets of the wealthiest mothers in Australia off the back of things like a possible GP tax, changes to the pension, all of that. He shouldn't need a leak.
That's not true. It's fully funded.
He shouldn't need a leak.
Just let Jim Chalmers.
He shouldn't need a leak like that to tell him how out of touch that plan is in this budget.
But he does have a mandate.
His policy is well known, right, about paid parental leave. Half the Liberal Party hates it. Somebody's leaked against him here to the Financial Review. It's not appropriate for the Financial Review to see the Commission of Audit before the Australian people, before yourself, before the party room. It should be released as soon as possible so that the Australian people can see what kind of attack on Middle Australia they have planned for us.
Jim Chalmers, Zed Seselja, we'll have to leave it there, but thanks very much for your discussion this morning. Do appreciate it.
Thanks
very much, Dave. Thanks.